hope we get out of here. You in the shower sing.
This is Dystopia Now, a show where a comedian and an academic explore the philosophies and religions of Silicon Valley and the tech billionaires shaping our country, our world, and our future. I'm Kate Willett, and my co-host is Emil Torres.
That's when it suddenly hit me. Let's let the filthy billionaires all leave for Mars, 'cause we don't want them here.
Hello, and welcome to the very first inaugural edition of a new podcast called Dystopia Now. I am Kate Willett.
I'm Dr. Emil P. Torres.
We're doing one of those smart person and person who doesn't know a lot of stuff podcasts. Emil is a professor of philosophy, right?
Yeah, a postdoc right now. So not
Okay.
quite professor.
Okay, but has a
aspiring
PhD.
professor.
Has a PhD. I am a comedian who talks about boners for a living a lot of the time. But we wanted to do this podcast because both of us, for the past many years, maybe even longer, have noticed that tech billionaires are having an increasing amount of influence in our society. So we wanted to do a podcast about some of the wackier stuff these guys actually believe. I'm thinking about the analogy with Scientology, like how they don't tell you about Xenu the first day. This is a podcast about what Xenu is.
Some people have actually referred to some of the ideologies that are embraced by people like Elon Musk as the Scientology of Silicon Valley.
Yes.
So there is a sort of connection. We'll explore in detail just how incredibly strange these ideologies, these worldviews, basically like a kind of religious vision of what the future of humanity ought to be. Really, really strange stuff.
Yeah, it's very, very weird. These people are really trying to create a very specific world, and they have a lot of money. They have more power than ever before in the Trump administration. They are obviously really moving into politics in a way that we haven't seen in the past. And so we wanted to talk about like what kind of world are these guys? And I'm saying guys. There's a couple women in there too, but it's a lot of guys.
It's mostly dudes. It's
Yeah,
mostly white dudes.
It's mostly white dudes.
Yeah.
If these people are allowed to realize their vision, what world are we looking at? And I think hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but I think we both think it's not a very good one, but it's also kind of funny. So we're hoping that in this podcast, it can kind of give people a better idea of like, what is the battle that we're actually fighting? Like what happens if these guys win, and then also laugh at them a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of these ideologies, they're so, we wouldn't be talking about them if they weren't massively influential. Right?
Yes.
I mean, the world is just replete with all sorts of bizarre, potentially dangerous worldviews. But the reason that these worldviews are worth focusing on and discussing and critiquing, as well as mocking, is precisely because they're so influential. But it really is, I mean, there's so many aspects of long-termism, which we'll discuss, and transhumanism that it's just comical.
Yeah. And they're also like, I know like Emil has done a ton of research on transhumanism, long-termism, but there's also like super wacky shit that some of these billionaires believe, like accelerationism and like the neo-reactionary movement that's happening. Like I think, a lot of people got exposed to that for the first time from this douchebag, Curtis Yarvin, getting profiled in the New York Times. We see stuff that's starting to happen with land. I'll just say it always comes down to a libertarian colony. Where can we create the libertarian colony? Should we create it on the open sea? Should we create it in outer space? Should we create it in San Francisco or a co-working space in Honduras?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. There's just like a lot of wacky stuff. And so we were thinking about like who's kind of the most relevant of these guys right now. And we wanted to start with what Elon Musk believes, kind of like our backup president, or maybe our shadow president, or however you want to call it. We're recording this a day after a horrific plane crash that may have happened in part because of the cuts that Elon Musk is making. We wanted to talk about major influential billionaire and like what's their Xenu. And we thought Elon Musk would be a great place to start. And we probably will not get through all of it in this episode. So we'll be back with a part 2 soon after this. But yeah, let's start with what kind of ideas is Elon filling his head with?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, it's almost hard to know where to start. I mean, I guess one thing to say is that there are certain ideologies that Musk has been promoting, like long-termism, as well as transhumanism, although I'm not familiar with him having used that term itself. But nonetheless, these ideologies are just massively influential in Silicon Valley. I mean, there's a real sense in which these ideologies are the water that people in Silicon Valley swim in, the air that they breathe. They're just ubiquitous, and they underlie a lot of the projects that are being pursued.
The supply that they're high on,
the
if you will.
supply that they're high. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I know people may be kind of coming to this with a different level of familiarity, but can you give us the couple-minute primer on what long-termism is for people who have never heard this word before? Because I think the first time I heard it, I was like, long-termism, thinking long-term. Oh, surely we mean taking climate change seriously. No. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, the term itself, it has a natural appeal. And in fact, some friends and colleagues of mine, like Rupert, who's the spokesperson of Extinction Rebellion in the UK for a while, have bemoaned the fact that long-termists have used the word, have sort of coined the word long-termism, because it would be really useful to have as a contrast to short-termist thinking, which is a big problem right now. Of course, that's one reason that we're facing, the climate catastrophe and so on. It's just very short-termist, myopic thinking. But long-termism, the way it's defined by long-termists, like Elon Musk, is just very different from what people would intuitively suspect. So it's really not, I mean, it goes way, way beyond caring about the long-term future of humanity. Long-termists are thinking on timescales not of like years, decades, and centuries, but literally millions, billions, and trillions of years. And at the heart of the long-termist approach to thinking about ethics, as it were, is a particular vision of the longer-term future of humanity. In this vision, which sort of subsumes transhumanism. I'll go into detail about transhumanism in a bit, but transhumanism is basically just the idea that we should use advanced technologies to radically re-engineer the human organism, ultimately to create a new post-human species that is superior to us in every relevant way.
I just want to say for a second, I know that this sounds like this to people who are listening to this may sound like we are conspiracy nuts, like just sitting in our room with a bulletin board smoking weed, but like this is real. You can look it up. And I'm also thinking about the fact that these guys are like very against someone transitioning their gender, but they're fine with transitioning to robot, I guess.
To a new species.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say about this is, yes, it does. At first, these ideologies sound so bizarre that reasonable listeners might say, surely these individuals, like Dr. Torres, they just don't understand what they're talking, or exaggerating, or this is some kind of hyperbole. But it's not. I used to be in the transhumanist movement, and I was a long-termist. In fact, I was listed recently as the 6th most prolific contributor to the long-termist literature.
Yeah. So you essentially, we've talked about this in the past, and you essentially left this cult. Like you were a semi-cult survivor from this weirdo Silicon Valley movement.
I was a true believer for the longest time.
This long-termist ideology, it has like, it's kind of a mix of tech bros and actual philosophers.
Yeah. Well, so I would say that within academia, within the field of philosophy, long-termism is dismissed by most philosophers. There's no survey out there confirming this, but my strong impression is that a lot of philosophers think it's just a non-starter.
Yeah.
It's really like a sort of reductio ad absurdum kind of argument. Like, oh, if these are the conclusions that long-termists are reaching, then something's gone very wrong with their argument, with their premises, And really the conclusion that long-termists come to is transhumanism plus. So not only should we radically re-engineer humanity, but once we do that, we should go out and colonize the universe as quickly as possible to establish this sprawling multi-galactic civilization throughout what's referred to as our future light cone. So that's just the region of the universe that is theoretically accessible to us.
This literally is like, it's sci-fi. It's sci-fi religion.
Absolutely. So that you could sort of see why people refer to this as the Scientology of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
You know?
And so my own first experience with encountering long-termism is, I think, actually listening to you on a
Mm,
podcast
mhm.
before we were IRL buddies. And I think that the example that either you gave or someone else gave was like, it's not about climate change, it's about beating robots in a battle 10 billion years into the future.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the key ideas within the long-termist worldview is this idea of existential risk. And an existential risk refers to any event that would permanently prevent us from creating this kind of techno-utopian world among the literal heavens at some point in the future. So that anything that would prevent us from doing that, from realizing utopia, that's an existential risk. So on the long-termist view, if we go out colonize space, we could create this sprawling multi-galactic civilization full of trillions and trillions of people. And by virtue of the fact that there could be these trillions and trillions of people, literally 10 to the 58, according to one lower bound estimate. That's a 1 followed by 58 zeros. That's how many future digital people there could be. So the
Yeah.
value of the future could be absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
What is the implication of that? It's that mitigating existential risk is way, way more important than anything else. So imagine humanity goes extinct as a result of like a nuclear catastrophe. This happens next year. Why would that be tragic? From a long-termist perspective, it would be tragic for two reasons. One much less significant than the other. The first
Okay.
is that 8 billion people would die.
Yeah.
But the second reason, which is much, much, much more important, much more profound, is that you'd lose all of these trillions and trillions of future digital people. What this then further implies is that if you have sub-existential risks that don't threaten the long-term future of humanity, the realization of all of these vast numbers of future people, then those are just not that important to the grand scheme of things. And climate change is typically seen by long-termists as one of these sub-existential risks. So climate change is going to be catastrophic. Recent estimates, actually, there was a paper that was published just, I think it was last month, from the University of Exeter, estimated that if we reach 3 degrees of warming by 2050, then 4 billion people will die.
Holy
So,
shit.
holy shit. So almost half the human population. That
Yeah.
is, it's utterly unfathomable. From a long-termist perspective, though, if you zoom out and you take this broader cosmic view, even the most catastrophic climate change scenarios will be just a little blip. Because climate change, even if 4 billion people die by 2050 and maybe an extra few billion by 2100, that is not going to threaten the long-term future of humanity. We'll be able to rebuild civilization, carry on, and eventually then colonize space. So this is why, from a long-term perspective, like things like climate change end up being sort of minimized or trivialized.
And I'm thinking about this from a materialist perspective,
Yeah.
and you kind of can't encounter what these guys believe about long-termism without thinking, okay, what's their incentive for believing this? And, for someone like Elon Musk, who we're going to go into in more depth in just a couple of minutes, Elon is a guy that he's the richest man in the world. He wants the most political power, and long-termism is a philosophy that can kind of give a kind of like moral argument for that, where like, if what we need to do as a society is prioritize winning the robot battle 10 billion years into the future, then I guess it makes sense for Elon Musk to have the most money and power because he's the only one who theoretically could make progress on something like colonizing space. So it's like this really complex self-justification that seems to me like it is both about bad people convincing themselves that what they're doing is actually immoral,
Yeah.
and also about an attempt to convince the people around them because they want to do stuff like with AI. We've been having a debate, like especially lately with DeepSeek, of someone like Sam Altman. I'm sure we'll talk about Sam Altman later, but his plan, if he can, I'm skeptical, but his plan is to like invent this technology that is putting billions of people out of a job, that is going to take unprecedented energy usage that is going to rely on the development of just whole new ways of getting energy, or, mass producing like nuclear power, which is going to come with risks. And, and I'm sure they're tech, so they're going to want to deregulate it and deregulate it. So to cut the corners on safety. Why on earth would a populace agree to let these guys do all that, to let them cause this immense harm? And this stuff, these philosophies that they believe, is kind of like a way that they can maybe convince people about like why that's good.
Yes, I completely agree with that. So one way of thinking about long-termism is that it provides yet another excuse for wealthy people, wealthy white people in the global north, to ignore the plight of the global poor, to ignore things like climate change and so on. I mean, long-termism says that people like Elon Musk are not only morally excused from alleviating global poverty, for example, but you are a morally better person for ignoring global poverty. Because what is Musk doing instead? Well, he's taking his money, and his money is bound up with three, among many other companies, but three companies in particular that are relevant to long-termism: SpaceX, which is supposedly going to get us to Mars. Mars is the stepping stone to the rest of the solar system, which is the stepping stone to the rest of the galaxy, and so on. So SpaceX could potentially play a very key part in realizing the long-termist vision of the future. There's XAI, his company focused on building AI, and then Neuralink, which literally aims to jumpstart transhuman evolution by merging our brains with AI. These are all long-termist projects. It, it it's outrageous. So yeah, I mean, I think that there is not much about what Musk is up to that makes sense outside of the long-termist framework. The other thing I would say, which ties into your very last point, is that, to state the obvious, I don't know what's going on inside Musk's head. Maybe I don't want to know either.
Probably a K-hole, I would say. Yeah, some kind of really difficult ketamine experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see the clip of him at the inauguration where his eyes are just sort of rolling in his head as
Yeah, no,
he just
I
looks so
recognize
high.
that. I look, not to completely discredit myself, but I have been to Burning Man a bunch of times, and I know what doing a lot of ketamine looks like, and that man is on a lot of ketamine. I'm knocking ketamine. Ketamine can be really fun. Increasingly, we're discovering it may be a powerful tool to treat medicine-resistant depression. But that being said, like, this guy is super high on drugs all
Seems
the
to be on
time.
it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
His daughter has mentioned that as well.
yeah, man. It's so okay. So long-termism, like, kind of the last thing that seems relevant before we go into like how we know that Musk believes this shit is like, I have kind of a theory that I don't know if it's completely true. You can let me know if you think it's true. Like, a lot of these Silicon Valley philosophies, like, they all, like effective altruism, long-termism, transhumanism, like, they all just end up providing a justification for eugenics. And I think
Yeah.
eugenics is something that we're starting to see these guys openly discuss more and more. Now, I know that the word eugenics has been thrown around a lot in the past 5 years. And I do think that our government has instituted some legitimately eugenicist policies. And I also think that, sometimes we'll see people say that, like, someone, not like eating dinner indoors at a restaurant is eugenics. And I'm not going to take a side in that debate, but I just want to say that when we're talking about these Silicon Valley people getting into eugenics, like, we mean the traditional version of eugenics, like, or neo eugenics, I guess, but we mean like kind of not debatable eugenics. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, um I agree with that. I've not heard anyone your restaurant reference.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
a
familiar
Twitter
with.
thing. It's definitely
Okay.
a Twitter thing. Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, I mean, eugenics, I think eugenics in just about all its forms is deeply, deeply problematic.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to say is might be to differentiate neo-eugenics from eugenics, because I would say that the sort of neo-eugenics you find among long-termists and people like Elon Musk and so on, I think is worse
Yeah.
than than traditional eugenics.
Okay. So in what way?
Yeah, so it's in a sense it is eugenics on steroids.
Hmm.
Because we had gestured at these reasons earlier in the conversation, which is that the old eugenicists from the 20th century who populated all sides of the political spectrum, there were plenty of progressive eugenicists here in the US,
Yeah, the
as
founder
well
of
as
Planned Parenthood. Yeah.
right, exactly. There are tons and tons of examples. I mean, the Nazis were explicitly inspired by the eugenics program that was implemented in California, I believe in 1909 during the Progressive Era. And they were inspired by that. And in fact, there were doctors, eugenicists in California who were proud that during the 1930s, the Nazis were trying to emulate their program. So
Fuck those people.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really worth like understanding that there was broad appeal for eugenics during the 20th century, but the goal of eugenics, of this old eugenics, was really to perfect the human species. So there's sort of this like range, you could think about this range of human variability, as it were.
Yeah.
And eugenicists wanted to, on the one hand, to bring the human population up to the highest level of health, of, quote unquote, intelligence and so on, while also preventing us from degenerating. Because it was huge. There were many, many people after Charles Darwin introduced his theory of evolution by natural selection, 1859, good year to remember. And suddenly a lot of people went, oh gosh, if we evolved just like any other species out there, maybe we could degenerate. And so there was, and in fact, this tied into earlier theories, which then got a second wind, as it were, that the reason that we have racial groups in the world is that humanity started off as white, and then some groups degenerated, and that's how we got non-white
That's
races. Yeah, so
so
just
fucked up.
yeah, absolutely. So
And
um,
I just want to say really
yeah,
quick, like the old eugenics, the type of eugenics that you're talking about, like that still exists in the world today. Like I think
yeah,
just a few years ago, we found out that ICE was sterilizing some people. That kind of eugenics has not died. It's very much alive and well, but I would say that like, it tends to be a thing that most people think is bad.
yeah, yeah. There was a judge, I can't remember where exactly, who it turns out was offering people convicted of crimes lower sentences if they agreed to be sterilized. This just recently, like the last 5 years or something.
So
So
fucked up.
so that version of eugenics is very much still alive. Transhumanism is an interpretation of eugenics.
And
It is
this is what you're talking about as the neo eugenics.
exactly, yes. And so this transhumanism is a good example of eugenics on steroids for precisely the reasons that we were hinting at earlier, which is that the goal isn't merely to perfect humanity, it's to create an entirely new post-human species, a species that might take the form of cyborgs, so maybe through Neuralink, some kind of program like that we could merge our brains with technology. There are these brain computer interfaces, things, devices that we could plug into our brain to access the internet. That's one possibility, but also using genetic engineering, maybe even uploading our minds to computers. So just replacing the biological substrate entirely with, silicon-based hardware.
So when I hear you say this stuff, and I'm
Yeah,
thinking about somebody that just maybe has never heard of this stuff before, what I'm thinking is this pretend person in my mind is I think Emil has seen a little too much Black Mirror. Like, how do we know that Elon Musk actually believes this shit?
yeah, yeah. Good question. So I would say a couple things to say about that. One is that Musk has been hugely influenced by a guy named Nick Bostrom. So Musk wrote a blurb for Nick Bostrom's 2014 book titled Superintelligence. Musk has repeatedly said that we almost certainly live in a computer simulation. This idea of computers that we live in a computer simulation, that has a long history, but it really wasn't discussed by many people until a 2003 paper. I'm almost certain that's the right date. 2003 paper by Nick Bostrom, which I believe is titled "Are We Living in a Computer Simulation?" Something close to that.
And the answer is no. Yeah.
And so Boston presented this argument for why we may very well be living in a computer simulation. And so Musk has just been regurgitating ideas from Nick Bostrom now for a while. The other thing I would say is that this idea of like mind uploading and, radical life extension and so on, these are ideas that, as I mentioned before, they are ubiquitous in Silicon Valley. It's just about everybody in Silicon Valley is definitely familiar with these ideas, but beyond that, probably also quite sympathetic. So you mentioned like Sam Altman, for example, he has explicitly said that we will almost certainly be uploaded minds within our lifetimes. That will become a possibility. And he said this in response to an article that was published in the MIT Technology Review, which found that he was one of, I believe it was 25 individuals who signed up with a new startup. The name I can't remember off the top of my head. It would take me just a moment to actually go through the mental files. But he was one of 25 people who signed up with this startup to have their brains preserved if they were to die young so that the brain could be digitized.
So that the
And
creepiness can live on forever.
it's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, even Jared Kushner just a few years ago said we may be the first generation that lives forever. So if anybody wants, like, I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares.
Can I tell you like a very quick story
Yeah.
about this? Okay, so I'm sure we'll get into Peter Thiel's philosophy later on, but I was at the first ephemeral. And Ephemeral was a project of the Seasteading Institute. And the Seasteading Institute was a nonprofit funded by Peter Thiel and some other billionaires. And they were going to try to homestead the open sea. And so I went to this party. I'm like 25 years old. I'm just thinking, okay, this is going to be like Burning Man, but on the river. And I get there and it was like full of just these weirdo libertarians, like mostly men, but there were women and non-binary people too. But everyone there was obsessed with immortality and everyone there felt like it was around the corner. And I remember getting in a conversation with this guy who was like such a dork, relevant to what I'm about to say. This person
Yeah.
truly really minimal social skills, just an incredibly abrasive individual, was telling me that once they, were able to get a seastead in the international waters so that they could do the libertarian colony there, they were all going to take immortality pills. Everybody was going to become immortal on this boat colony where they're going to farm algae and do libertarianism, mostly in the form of medical tourism. Why? I like that my doctors have been to school, but so he's like, once we take these immortality pills, the chicks are going to become super horny. And I'm like, why is that? And he's like, well, without the stress of death, mortality hanging over them, that fear of existential dread, they're going to be so relaxed that all they're going to want to do is fuck. And I'm just thinking, man, that's crazy because I would only have sex with you if there was a literal gun to my head. Like, I don't think that immortality is going to do anything to improve your prospects at all. But point being, like, I think that these ideas about like immortality, like it's quite pervasive, like from the tech billionaires that are actually leading the adoption of this ideology. So even like regular tech workers, obviously not all of them, but like this immortality idea is like very much the religion in the Bay Area.
Absolutely. And I think along with that, there is this idea, which is just standard among these tech individuals, that the future is digital.
Yeah.
So that's another reason I point to that Musk takes these ideas seriously, takes long-term seriously, takes the long-termist imperative to radically re-engineer ourselves. Ultimately, the problem with the human condition is our biology, right? It's that we have these brains that, the brains are the most complex object in the known universe, but they're also just marked by these inherent limitations,
Yeah.
which are the result of just millions of years of contingent evolution.
Yeah.
Our brains are just cobbled together. There's no actual design. And really what we want in the future is to then replace biology. Biology's messy. It's got these limitations and so on. Replace it with computer hardware. That is true liberation. And that is the future.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much wrong with it. First of all, I do want to say, like, in his defense, in Elon's defense, if I was Elon Musk, I would want to replace my biology as well. Like, I've seen that swimsuit picture of him, and that man is a pasty ass motherfucker. I am too, but I mean, there's something very gross about him. So I kind of get why this took hold. I'm not even trying to like insult appearances. It's just his whole everything from personality to looks to everything. He's just like, he's a really gross guy. So, like, part of me gets how this idea took hold in some way. But, I mean, it also serves to justify these billionaires putting humanity in a lot of like existential risk, like, using all this energy. Oh, who cares? Like, we don't need bodies anymore. So, like, who cares how high the temperature of the planet is, or if there's extreme weather events? And like, I honestly don't think that they will be able to pull off a lot of this stuff that they think that they're going to pull off. I don't think that 50 years from now or 100 years from now, there's going to be people, at least not a large number of people, like living on Mars. I really don't. I mean, maybe, I'll be dead by then probably if this immortality pill doesn't succeed. So you won't be able to like do an own of me. But like, they're not gonna like. I think a lot of these ideas, like turning everybody into a digital being or moving to outer space, it isn't going to happen. And a lot of the reason that they talk so much about it is to hype their own products. Like when Sam Altman comes out and is like, oh yeah, we're going to have to replace all these jobs and transform the economic system. And it's going to be so fucked up, man. I think it's like, yeah, maybe he really believes that, but it's also to get investors by being like, wow, this guy's building something so powerful, it's going to destroy the world. So like, at least I'm going to make some money in the process.
Yeah, I mean, Altman has literally said AI will probably destroy the world, but
Yeah.
at least we'll have good machine learning companies in the meantime.
Yeah.
And I'm more or less quoting.
Yeah, no,
So-
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and also, yeah, I mean, like Sam Altman, like he clearly does believe that, the world is headed to a bad place because this guy personally has his own apocalypse bunker, as like a
Yeah.
lot of these guys do. So I'm not
A
saying
lot
that
of
they're,
them.
I'm not saying that they necessarily believe that, but don't believe it, but it kind of reminds me of like some of the hype around like the Joker movie when it came out,
Yeah.
like where they're like, oh, this movie is so fucked up, it's gonna cause a shooting. People are gonna see this movie and lose their minds. We can't let anyone see this movie. And it's like the greatest marketing campaign ever for the Joker, which I watched, and it was kind of fun, but I mean, it was just like, it was not gonna cause a shooting. And I think that it's much more likely that these people, these billionaires, will end up harming the world in ways that they are now, like ways
Yeah.
that very much recognize, like extracting our resources, treating the people that work for them very poorly, like taking things that they need from, developing nations and getting, children to do the mining and just like the ways that exist now. And this kind of like, oh yeah, we'll have, digital beings and it'll all be worth it. It's like, it's just everything is the ends justify the means. And so they have to make the ends sound like they're going to be really worth it.
I completely agree with that. And this is part of the danger of these techno-utopian ideologies that are so influential among the tech billionaires as well as just everybody else in Silicon Valley. If the ends justify the means, and the ends are a literal utopia in which you live forever, you get to go colonize space, you get to live in these virtual reality worlds spread throughout, I mentioned before, our future light cone, that region of the universe that's accessible to us. If those are the ends, if the ends are just infinite value, then what means are off the table.
Yeah.
It makes perfectly good sense within this particular framework.
Yeah.
For people like Musk to go, oh, well, I'm ignoring the global poor, maybe I'm exacerbating climate change and so on. So what? We're talking about utopia here.
Yeah. And I mean, the idea that the ends justify the means is certainly not limited to these guys. I'm thinking of a recent example. Everyone on the internet was celebrating Luigi for killing a healthcare CEO. It's probably most of the people who are celebrating that or laughing really hard at it are not people who think that murder is good under most circumstances. I would say that the audience for that was probably mostly an anti-murder audience. But it was like about the idea, like, okay, maybe if we deal the ruling class this blow and make them feel afraid of us again, then we'll finally fix our terrible healthcare system. However, these ends justify the means ideas in Silicon Valley, it's not about creating a world that is going to actually be beneficial for most people. They're talking about a society that has extreme inequality still. They're talking about a society that is anti-democratic most of the time. They are the god kings of this utopia. It's not a utopia that any of us, if we were living there, would probably identify as such. It's a utopia for them. them, and then the people that are close to them, and maybe like Matt Iglesias or something, but like it's not a workers' utopia. It's very different than like the Marxist vision of a stateless, classless, moneyless society where people are free to pursue the things that they find most fulfilling and there's no alienation. It's like it's a highly hierarchical, authoritarian. It's not something that I think most of us would want to go to, even if they pull it off, which I don't think they will.
Yeah, so I mentioned before that one problem with utopia is that it tends to lead to a kind of pernicious utilitarian calculus, ends
Yeah.
justify the means, to quote the words of one scholar. But another potential problem is that at least the vast majority of versions of utopia out there, they are inherently exclusionary, right? Somebody's always left out. You might argue that that's not always a bad thing. So Christian might say, yeah, sure, non-believers, the unrepentant and so on, they're left out of utopia, of paradise, of heaven. That's not a bad thing, right? Maybe a Marxist would say, okay, capitalists are left out of this communist utopia, communist world state that we create that's classless, that is based on direct democracy and so on. But it's at least worth asking who exactly will get excluded from particular versions of utopia that are out there in the marketplace of ideas. When it comes to long-termism, I think that most of humanity would get left out. Even more, you could make the case, which brings us back to what we were talking about before, that humanity itself is maybe excluded from utopia, because the goal is to create this new post-human species by merging our brains with AI, by maybe completely uploading our minds, and so on. In a world that is run by these quote unquote superior post-humans, more powerful post-humans, does our species have any place? I mean, literally, there are people in the long-termist community who have argued that we should create our successors and then gracefully disappear, bring about our own extinction. Because after all, if we just are sticking around, we're these inferior beings that are using up resources that post-humans could use for much more, in a much more valuable way.
Yeah.
And so do we even have a place in this utopia, or is it about marginalizing and ultimately eliminating our species itself? So there is a very real sense in which a pro-extinctionist view, a view that advocates for the extinction of humanity, is widespread in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Namely long-termism and so on. Because we just don't have a place in the future. And it might even be worse than that, because you were talking about, you had mentioned earlier, like other species, nature, and so on. There was a book that was published in 2022 by leading long-termist and transhumanist named William McCaskill, based at
Yeah.
Oxford.
And he's like the main kind of philosopher of this, right? Like he's the main academic of the movement.
Yeah, so him, Toby Ord, and Nick Bostrom
Okay.
are sort of the three main figures. And so
No
in this-
women. Yeah. No ladies.
No, that the community is, like we were saying before, I mean, it really is just overwhelmingly white and male and cis and straight and so on. So it's just not a representative sample of humanity.
Yeah.
But anyways, so in this book, this book, when McCaskill published it, Elon Musk retweeted McCaskill's tweet about the book. And Elon Musk said, quote, a close match for my philosophy. So he's referring to long-termism. In this book, McCaskill not only suggests that the future is digital, that we should ultimately replace, he literally says we should replace human workers with AGI, artificial general intelligence.
Yeah.
But McCaskill also makes this jaw-dropping argument that our systematic obliteration of the biosphere might be net positive, might be good. Why is that? Because he says that there's a lot of suffering among wild animals. So consequently, the fewer wild animals there are, the less wild animal suffering. And the less wild animal suffering, the better the world is.
Yeah.
Because there's less suffering. So it's not even clear that the natural world has a place in this quote unquote utopia that these individuals are pushing us towards with all of their projects, like trying to build artificial general intelligence and so on.
And it's like the opposite of the Garden of Eden. It's like no plants, no animals, not even like physical bodies to enjoy, no sensory experiences really. I mean, at least not.
I think they would say, like, okay, okay, maybe there won't be any now any forests and any meadows, and so on. But so what? We'll be living in digital worlds, and we can create digital meadows and digital forests, and we can recreate the aromas of like walking through a meadow and so on in these digital worlds. And in fact, these digital worlds, we can design them such that all of the creatures that exist in them don't suffer. And so that would be better than this natural world we have where like there are birds and and squirrels and so on that can suffer. So this is their vision, and it's really, really extreme, and in my opinion, it's really impoverished.
Yeah, and they literally think they're God. Like this is when we're getting into this, like we're talking about they want to assume the role of like a biblical God.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole idea behind Yuval Noah Harari's book Homo Deus, Man the God, and it's also why a lot of people in the community refer to artificial general intelligence as godlike AI. Because basically the thinking is, okay, as atheists, we don't believe in God. This is their thinking. So God doesn't exist. Why not then just create him?
Yeah.
Why not just create God? And once we create God, this AGI or this superintelligence, then, if God sufficiently loves his parents, not children, so it inverts that traditional religious view. God is our parent, but in this case, God would be our offspring. If God loves its parents, then it will give us everything we want, and we can just say, "Hey, create a utopia, figure out how to enable us to live forever, fulfill all of the promises of traditional religion. We get to live in a literal heaven." Among the actual heavens above us, living in these vast computer simulations where there's no suffering and so on. This is the actual vision.
So, how do you think that Elon's belief in long-termism and transhumanism impacts the kinds of actions we see him taking right now?
Great question. So this actually makes me think of an idea that we had just briefly touched upon earlier, which is the question of, does Elon Musk actually believe these things? I'm not in his head, so I don't know. From my perspective, though, as a critic of long-termism, it doesn't matter. Whether or not he actually believes the long-termist vision, or he's just exploiting it to justify what he wants to do anyways, that doesn't matter, because in both cases, the long-termist ideology is providing a kind of superficially plausible moral excuse for going to and trying to colonize Mars, for merging our brains with AI, and so on. So I don't know what he really believes, but I don't think it matters, because either way, he's using long-termism to say, what I'm doing, it's not just like a morally okay thing to do, it's the morally right thing to do. Like, he is a morally upstanding individual.
And
Yeah.
and is he like where is he giving these excuses? Because it's like it's not to us. Like he's not talking about the long-termism stuff publicly, at least not with, most people. Like who is he talking to about this? Is it investors? Is it like where does he get to deploy this excuse?
So I think he has, by retweeting Will McCaskill and some other links to various articles written by Bostrom, he is sort of making a public appeal to these ideologies to justify his views. But also, maybe most importantly, these ideologies enable him to justify to himself
Yeah. And it
what he's
seems
doing.
like there's a community in Silicon Valley of these billionaires and sorry, but they're lackeys, like these kind of lower level software engineers that are building this stuff. Definitely not all of them, but some where it like they're talking to each other. It's pretty insular. They're not taking a lot of feedback, even from like other types of billionaires.
Yeah.
And it's like the venture capitalist community and the tech community are, they're kind of having this insular conversation about the direction that they want the world to go and what we should do to achieve that. And like it's not an open debate. It's not something that the rest of us get to really participate in and say like, hey, that's weird as hell. I actually like having a body. Like being sad and sick is worth the experience of giving someone a hug. And I don't actually want you to kill every animal on the planet. I really like my pets and the forest. And it's like they're kind of on this trajectory to try to, achieve this vision that they're all hyping each other up about. And it's like something that isn't even really known to most people until we see these instances popping up of these guys doing something that's like really fucking weird. And people are like, well, why are you doing that?
I mean, also, it's just worth adding here maybe that because of their utopian thinking, a lot of people who imbibed the long-termist, poison, whatever, they don't really discuss or acknowledge that post-humans would also have their own limitations. And like no matter what mode of existence we take, no matter what form of being we take, there's always going to be some kind of limitations. And just to point out one potential drawback of becoming like an immortal post-human, it's not implausible that if in a post-human world, maybe there could be political dissidents who are captured. And since one's life could be extended indefinitely, that these individuals end up in prison, not for years or decades, but for millions and millions of years.
That's with like a plot of a Black Mirror episode. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you can imagine somebody being tortured, for like the reason I'm saying this is that the possibility of post-humanity opens up space for these sorts of horrors to occur. And there isn't much discussion because there's just this kind of groupthink. There's all these people in Silicon Valley who all have the same worldview. There's nobody there to actually challenge them. And, for all of their whining about wokeness and ideological, homogeneity in universities and so on, there is extreme ideological homogeneity in Silicon Valley. And there aren't these critics there to point out like, oh, that's a really like weird idea.
And they're
Like,
brutal towards their critics, right? Like, I know that you and I have talked a little bit about when you left the long-termist movement, there was a bunch of people that were harassing you and I think they're not kind to the people that criticize them. They're not engaging in good faith with the people who have some very understandable concerns about these ideas.
I got many threats of physical violence as a result.
And you're just like, I know, because I've gotten threats from like these like tech people before, and I'm just like, I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, I'm so much more scared when I get threats from like the right wing guys. When I get threats from like tech dudes, I'm like considering in my mind, I'm like, I think I could beat you up. Like I'm only 5'1" and I'm a woman, but I'm pretty sure I could kick your ass. Not really, because a lot of them like they would just get revenge politically or whatever. But it's just like there's no tolerance for criticism, and we can see this behavior even in Elon, the way that he acts towards his enemies. Yeah,
absolutely. And they have an argument for that, which is that even if there is a low probability that their vision of the future is accurate or will come to pass, even if there's low probability, the amount of value that is associated with that particular vision is so great that if you take that amount of value and you multiply it by the tiny probability, you still get a huge number, right? So they're going to say, oh no, we're not certain about our view. We're not dogmatic, but they do this calculation, which is that the stakes on their view are so high that even if there's a tiny probability that they're right, you still get it a huge number. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
They're calculating basically expected value. That would be the technical term.
Yeah, no, it's an extreme form of utilitarianism to where something even like we've talked about in the past, like even like dropping a nuclear bomb is seen as acceptable. Genocide is acceptable. Complete environmental destruction is acceptable because the ends justify the means again. And eugenics and letting a ton of people die off. It's pretty extreme, and especially seeing it merge with the political right, who like already dealing with a huge white supremacy problem and men's rights activists. Is that what they're called still? I don't know, like an incel problem.
Yeah.
I guess we should wrap up soon for this week, but next time I would like to go a little further into like, what is Elon Musk actually doing right now? Like, what is he up to, and how may his ideologies be influencing that? And this is not an Elon Musk podcast. After Elon, we'll probably talk about, we have some people planned, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, just, a lot of different horrible psychos.
Sam Altman, surely.
Sam Altman, yeah. Oh man, we can go into like Elon Musk beef with Sam Altman. That's kind of an interesting one. This has been really fun. Any other things that we should say about this before we wrap up this week?
No, maybe one last thought.
Okay.
Would be, you mentioned genocide. Oh, genocide's okay. That is not hyperbole to say that. In the 2002 paper, in which Nick Bostrom introduced the idea of existential risk, again, that's like the key concept of long-termism. He literally says that the worst atrocities and natural disasters of the 20th century, and then he went on to list that, included in the list is World War II, which of course itself subsumes the Holocaust. He describes these as mere ripples on the surface of the great sea of life. Why? Because in the grand scheme of things, when you take a cosmic vantage point, which is what long-termism encourages people to do, literally millions, billions, trillions of years in the future, these are just little blips. They've hardly affected the total amount of human happiness or value that we will have created over, across cosmic history. They're just hiccups. They're molecules in a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
And so there really is this kind of sense that, if that's his view about past genocides, that's going to be his view about future genocides, or maybe present genocides. And so this worldview, just to underline, it really does lead someone to minimize or trivialize any kind of contemporary problem that is deemed to be sub-existential. Because if it's sub-existential, it doesn't threaten the long-term future of humanity, doesn't threaten our, quote, vast and glorious future among the heavens, to quote Toby Ord, long-termist. And so, that is a danger. That's one reason I think this techno-utopian ideology that Musk and all these other people have been promoting and have embraced is really dangerous. So that's my closing thought on the cheery topic of genocide.
Yeah. So here's my closing thought.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast specifically is because we all see the damage that billionaires are doing to our country, to our worlds. And that's not a new thing. There's always been a ruling class fucking shit up. But I don't think that these guys, these tech billionaires, really fall in the category even of regular shitty billionaire, because the goal of a regular shitty billionaire, all billionaires, is to enrich themselves and to gain power. And that's not new. But the thing about these tech billionaires is that it's all that plus a kind of religious fanaticism. And so we wanted to explore what is that religion? And it varies by person, but there are common threads. I think the society that these guys want to create is very much, there's an ideological project, I guess I'll say. And
it's more than just maximizing profit.
Yeah. It's funny and weird to think about, and it's also scary. So anyway, we hope that you have enjoyed this or learned something. And this is a brand new venture for us. So please subscribe and follow us on social media. And we're going to keep going and be back with part 2 of Elon Musk. Thank you so much. Dystopia Now is a co-production of Emil Torres and Kate Willett. Our theme song is Hunger Strike by Emil Torres. We have no outside funding or advertising, so if you can become a contributor on Patreon, we deeply appreciate your help keeping the show going. We are a brand new podcast, so please rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice, and we'd love your help getting the word out. Thank you so much.